watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following. And by viewers like you.
Hi, I'm Rabbi Mordechai Becher. Welcome to Shalom TV, Dimensions of the Daf, in which we explore different ideas from the Talmud in every episode. And I want to thank everyone for watching, those in past. It's always fun when I travel to meet people who have seen the program. I get the occasional emails with questions, which is great. That's fine with me. So this week, subject is do me a favor. Do me a favor. Now I want to discuss an apparent contradiction in Jewish law and a famous resolution to this apparent contradiction based on something in the Talmud. Okay, so let's start with the following. Code of Jewish law is divided into 4 sections. First section is daily law, everything to do with time, starting from waking up in the morning and the calendar, festivals, Shabbat, etc., prayers, etc. Eating. The second section deals with the laws of the kosher laws and family purity, etc., and mourning and burial and stuff like that. The third section deals with marriage, divorce, adultery, incest, relationships. And the fourth section, Choshen Mishpat, which means the breastplate of judgment, deals with financial law, jurisprudence, financial law, torts, damages, business law, contracts, hiring, everything to do with money. So this is a section from the Code of Jewish Law, Choshen Mishpat. And I should also point out that everything in the Code of Jewish Law is based almost completely on things of the Talmud. So they derive it from the Talmud. Anyway, it was written in the early 1600s by Rabbi Yosef Karo of Tzfat, Safed, in the north of Israel, where there was a major community of Jewish scholars there in the 1600s, 1700s, and it was added to by a Rabbi Moshe Isserles, the Ramah from Krakow, very great rabbi from Krakow, a little after, and the combination of the writings of Rabbi Yosef Karo and Rabbi Moshe Isserles form what's called the Code of Jewish Law. In Hebrew, it is known as Shulchan Aruch, which literally means a set table. Being Jewish, we use food metaphors a lot, so it's a set table means it's a smorgasbord of Jewish law. Right? It's all open, and you can see everything, it's easy to choose from, and you can take whatever you want. So, very classic metaphor, but that's what it's called, the Code of Jewish Law. Okay, so we are told the following. Ha'omer lechaveiro, one who says to his friend, not necessarily a close friend, you say to someone, echolimi, I guess you're somewhere traveling, and someone says, well, would you like lunch? And I say, gee, thanks very much. So he takes me to his home for lunch, or guy says, I'll come for lunch. Would you like to eat lunch? And I say, sure. We go to a restaurant, whatever. Maybe a difference between a home and a restaurant, but he takes me to his home and he gives me lunch. And afterwards, he says, that'll be $17, please. I said, what? You invited me for lunch. How dare you charge me? Do I have to pay? Now, it could be, you're right. It's not nice. What he did is not appropriate. It's not nice, right? But you know what? The reason we have laws is because people don't always act appropriately. If everyone always acted appropriately, we wouldn't need laws. You only need a code of Jewish law, at least in the area of financial law, if people don't act appropriately. So people don't act appropriately. So how do we deal with it? So the guy says, would you like to eat? I go to his house. I have a hearty breakfast, lunch, or dinner. and he now hands me a bill at the end of the time, and he says, I'd like you to pay. Do I have to pay? Well, if you look at the Code of Jewish Law, it says, one who says to his friend, eat with me, and afterwards demands payment, the guest must pay. We do not assume it was a gift. I guess you should say, on the context, it's pretty clear usually. Most times, most situations I've been in, usually it's pretty clear that it's a gift. But if the guy demands payment afterwards, according to law, Code of Jewish Law, it says I have to pay him. He's not a pleasant guy, maybe. Right? He didn't do the appropriate thing, maybe, but that's irrelevant. Right? That's between him and God or his wife, etc. But the fact of the matter is, I've got to pay him. Now we come to the problem. Okay, that in and of itself does not pose a problem. Second is we have a similar situation. That was in the Code of Jewish Law, 246. If we look a little further along, Code of Jewish Law, section 365, paragraph 10, it says the following. Someone who says to his friend, he says, live in my courtyard. I guess in a hot climate, courtyard would be fine. But the basic gist is, he says, you can sleep. I'll offer you a room. You want a room to sleep? I see you're a stranger. Would you like a room to sleep in? I say, yes, thank you very much. That'd be wonderful. And he offers me the room to sleep in. And then the next day, when I'm about to leave, he says, that will be $59.99. Yeah, that's 60. Or I'll tell you what. Yeah, $59.99. Normally charge $60, giving you a cent off. Right? Or he says that'll be $60. Right? So do I have to pay? And here the Code of Jewish Law says, one who says to his friend, live in my courtyard, and afterwards demands payment, the guest does not have to pay him. Does not have to pay him. So the question we have to ask is, why is it that in the case of food, if I would say, I would not do this, don't worry, if I ask you to eat at my house, we're not going to charge you. If I ask you to sleep at my house, I invite you to stay over, not going to charge you. But let's say I was a mean guy and I did that, right? So in the case of food, for some reason, you'd have to pay me. But in the case of sleeping over, if we'd go to court about this, then you would not have to pay me. And the question is, why not? Why don't I have to pay? So this is an interesting contradiction, and it's addressed by a number of commentaries. The Gemara has the following case. The Gemara, it's not really important to see the context. The Gemara is discussing, I have to give you some context, otherwise you won't know what we're talking about here. According to Jewish law, there are taxes. Like in most countries, there are taxes. Probably every country. I don't know of a country without tax, but whatever. Let's say. The taxes, at least in an agricultural society, were percentages of the crops that you had to give. So you have gathered in your grain, you've got your wheat harvest or whatever it is. So a certain amount of that has to go to the priests, a certain amount has to go to the Levites, a certain amount has to go to the poor, a certain amount has to be taken to Jerusalem and eaten there. There are various reasons. The priests and the Levites are the people who work in the temple and they do all the teaching and the education amongst the Jewish people, much of it. So therefore they get the communal money from taxes. They also happen to usually sit on the courts, etc. Obviously, also some of it goes to the poor, as some of our taxes go to people who are poor, live below the poverty line, etc. And in addition, some of it is eaten in Jerusalem because the people in Jerusalem host the entire Jewish world 3 times a year, Passover, Shavuot, Sukkot. So the money is, we distribute some of the food there. Be that as it may, that's the basic rule, that you have to give what these are called ma'asrot, truma and ma'aser, tithes. In English, tithes. So the Gemara is trying to determine what the status is of the tithes. In other words, let's say I have to give 10% of this pile of wheat. Now, is it considered as though that 10% belongs to the priest already, or does it not belong to him yet? In other words, does it only belong to the priest once I have taken this 10%, separated it out, and given it to him? Or is it considered, it's not actually 10%, it's less than that, let's say 1%. Or does it only belong to the priest, is it only considered the priest's possession when is it already considered the priest's possession before I've taken it out? In other words, it's as though he owns 1% of this pile of grain. Or is it only is considered his possession once I've actually separated out this 1% of the crop and given it to him? Okay, that's the question which the Talmud is dealing with. Is this clear? Okay. Now, the Gemara says this. This Tana is of the opinion that that priestly Jews, although not yet separated, are regarded as virtually separated. It means they're considered as though they've already been separated. And the Gemara says now, Toshma, come and hear. It's going to bring a proof. And it says this. Hareisha anso beis hamelech garno. Someone whose granary, garno, actually the Hebrew garno, is probably where the English granary comes from. Goren is a granary in Hebrew. So the king, the government, seizes your wheat. It seizes your pile of wheat in the granary. If it was seized because of debt that you owed, let's say you owed taxes, and so the government comes and seizes your wheat in order to pay back your debt of taxes. If so, right, the Talmud says in such a case you still have to take tithes. You still have to take tithes as if that wheat was still in your possession and give it to the priest or the Levite. Is this clear? In other words, the king, you owed money to the government. The government seizes wheat and you haven't yet taken a percentage of that wheat and given it to the priests or the Levites. Right? Now, can you say to them, sorry, too bad, it was taken by the government? Right? So the Talmud says no. If it was taken because you owed the government money, you've got to give from the rest of your crops as if you still possess that wheat, and you have to add the additional percentage of your crop as if you still owed that wheat. Okay, so you're still giving as if you own that wheat. In Ba'an Para, if it was just confiscated randomly, let's say it's a non-democratic government, it's a government that they confiscate your money just for the heck of it. So in such a situation, Patur Mila Aser, you are exempt from giving tithes. Just to make it clear again, I have wheat, it gets confiscated by the government. If it's because I owe the government money, then it does not exempt me from paying my tithes to the priests and Levites from that amount. So I have to calculate, when I give my tithes to the priests or Levites, I have to calculate as though I still had that amount of grain, even though it was confiscated by the government. Because it was confiscated because of my debt, I still have to pay. If it was confiscated as a random arbitrary action where they're just going around confiscating people's property, then I don't have to add that. So the Gemara seems to think that this would be evidence that even though I haven't yet taken the tithes from this pile of wheat, nevertheless it's still considered as though it belongs to the priest. And that's why I have to pay back the priest his tithes. The Gemara says no, Shani Hasam, there it is different, because I get benefit. The way I've translated it here is, it confers an advantage on me. Why? It's not because the priest already owns part of that, nothing to do with that. Rather, it's because this. Look, had the government not confiscated this pile of grain from me, had the government not confiscated this pile of grain from me, I would have had to pay my debt with another pile of grain, which means I got benefit. The fact that this pile of grain, which includes in it something which I owe the priest, so therefore I benefited from what I owed the priest, because had the government not taken that, they would have taken something else. They measure out, I owe them this and this many bushels of wheat. So part of those, 1 bushel of wheat was really owed to tithes. They take that, right, I am benefiting from the fact they took that. Because had they not taken that bushel, they would have taken another bushel from somewhere else. Inasmuch as that's so, I still have to pay the priest what I owe him of that money. Or of that tithes. Okay? You're wondering where this is going? Tosfot is going to tell us where it's going. Great commentary on the Talmud, the Tosfot, says the following. Because by taking these bushels of wheat, from which I hadn't yet taken tithes, by confiscating these, had the government confiscated it would have confiscated something else. So the fact that it confiscated this means that I'm benefiting. I have an advantage. Because had it not confiscated this, the king would have confiscated something else. V'im tomar, matnos kahuna k'sha'achlam mishtar shilei, shebemakam zeh lo achal davar acher amai pater. Tosfot asked the following question. We have a rule that if you ate the tithes, let's say instead of the government confiscating this bushel of wheat, I ate it. I ate it. So we say that I don't have to take tithes from something else and pay back for the tithes that I took from this. Why is that so? Tosfot says, why are you exempt? Didn't you benefit? Had you not eaten this, you would have had to eat something else. Had I not eaten from this bushel of grain, which has got some in it which belongs to the Kohen, I would have had to eat from somewhere else. So why is it that we don't consider it an advantage of me or a benefit to me in eating from this bushel, whereas in which case I should have to pay the Kohen? Whereas in the case of the king, right, we say that when the king or the government seizes this bushel, I do have an advantage because I would have had to pay him from some other wheat that I own, pay the government, and since I'm not paying the government from the other wheat, I'm paying from this wheat, that means I get an advantage, so I owe the priest still his tithes. But in the case of eating, Tosfot says, if I ate the priest, this bushel of grain, which part of which is owed to the priest, there the Talmud says that I do not have to pay back the priest. And Tosfot says, why not? Why can't we apply the same logic? Why can't we say, had I not eaten this, I would have had to eat something else? So I've got an advantage from the priest's tithes. Tosfot's answer is, it is not the same as the king confiscating it, king seizing it, because the king would definitely have had to I would have had to pay my debt back with something else that I own, or the king would have taken something else. But in the case of but in the case of eating, efshar de lo mishtar shalei shehaya misana, I could always claim I would have fasted. How can you consider it an advantage that I ate this wheat here? You say, well, had you not eaten this wheat, which has got tithes in it, you would have had to eat something else. I say, no, I wouldn't have. I could have skipped lunch. I could have skipped breakfast. I could have skipped dinner. I could have fasted. So if you could say I could have fasted, that means you have no advantage conferred upon you by eating this, because you can't say that had I not eaten this, I would have had to eat something else. And therefore, since in such a situation I could say that I would have fasted, consequently, no benefit or advantage is conferred upon me. In the case of the king stealing my crop, or it's not stealing, but in the case of the king confiscating my crop, you cannot say I wouldn't have paid it because I have to pay. I have to pay the king one way or the other. So if he didn't take this bushel of wheat, he would have taken another bushel of wheat. And if he takes another bushel of wheat, right, that means, and he didn't take it, I have now advantage, clear financial advantage from having the king take that crop. And therefore, it's as though I have taken financial advantage from tithes and I have to pay back the Kohen for those tithes. Let me just clarify. What we see from Tosfot, this is Rabbi Yosef Trani speaking, what we see from the Gemara and the Tosfot is that when I eat this bushel of wheat, which contains in it money or wheat that should go to the priest, I don't owe the priest money because there's no clear advantage that has been conferred upon me from eating that, because I can always claim that I would have fasted. I can always claim that I would have fasted. So why doesn't that work in the case of where someone invites me to eat? Why do I have to pay? If they say, okay, now pay me after having invited me for lunch, why do I have to pay them? Why can't we say that I could have said I would have fasted? I wasn't planning on eating lunch. The fact that you invited me is all very nice, but I wasn't going to eat lunch. That means I get no benefit and I have no advantage conferred upon me. So Rabbi Yosef of Trani, he says the reason there's a distinction is because of this. In the case of the priest, there's no individual priest that can sue me. Because I can always say to this priest, I would have given it to the other. There's a whole class, there's a whole tribe of what we call Kohanim amongst the Jewish people. Kohanim and Levites, I'm a Levite, right? So there's a whole tribe of us. But since there's no one individual that can actually bring me to court, so I can always evade, the judgment. And in Jewish law, we don't have class action suits. That means you can't have a suit where all of the Levites or all of the priests sue me for that money. And so he says, but when it's with an individual, he can always say, well, okay, you could have fasted, but in the end, you've destroyed the food. I gave you food, you destroyed the food, it no longer exists, I demand payment for that. And I can't say I would have fasted, because he can always say, okay, you would have fasted, but at the end of the day, you've destroyed my food by eating it. I want payment. Why can't the priest say that? Because there is no individual priest. Because I can always say, yeah, I wouldn't have given it to you, I would have given it to the other guy. the other guy comes to me, I could always say I would have given it to a third party, and so on and so forth. So there's no individual that can actually sue me. And consequently, according to Rabbi Yosef Trani, that's why I cannot apply the logic of I would have fasted, and therefore I have to pay for the food. However, there is one of our great sages, known as the Ketzot HaChoshen. He says, but what Rabbi Yosef Trani says doesn't really help me when it comes to sleeping. Because maybe I could have said I wouldn't have slept. I would have stayed up all night at the casino, right? You offered me a place to sleep, very nice. So he says, what's the distinction between one and the other? So he says this. Because remember, what we're trying to figure out is what's the distinction between someone saying, please come and eat with me, which he can charge me. It may not be nice, but if he does charge me, I've got to pay. Whereas someone says, come and you can sleep in my spare guest room, right? And I do, and he presents me with a bill in the morning, I don't have to pay. Why in the case of sleeping do I not have to pay? In the case of eating, do I have to pay? So the Ketzot has a very interesting answer. He says this. In the case of eating, was there loss, tangible loss to the other person? Answer is yes. Because that food which he gave to me is no longer in existence. However, and was there tangible benefit to me? The answer is yes. Even if I would claim that I would have fasted, but I cannot deny that having eaten lunch, I benefited. So that means you've got a case where I benefited and you lost. A case where I benefit and the other person loses, I must pay. In other words, there's clear benefit, because even if I say I would have fasted, right, even if I say I would have skipped lunch or breakfast, but the fact is once I do eat it, there's clearly benefit and pleasure to me. And since my benefit and pleasure comes as a result of a loss to the other person, right, if he demands payment for that, I must pay, because I benefited and he lost. In the case where he says, please come and stay in my guest room, right, since it's not a hotel, it's not a place that he normally rents out, did he lose anything by my sleeping there? The answer is no. If it was a hotel, he lost. You know, the hotel, there's a clear loss. Why? Because if he did not rent it, if I did not pay for it, if I'm sleeping there for free, he could have rented the room to someone else for payment. So therefore there's loss. But if it's just someone who says, come and stay in my guest room, then there's no loss to him. And but the answer is I did get benefit. But you see, it's not tangible benefit. Because I could actually sleep, you can actually sleep anywhere. Theoretically, I could sleep on a park bench. I could sleep in a gutter, God forbid, but I could. Theoretically, you could sleep there. A person can pretty much sleep anywhere, right? So therefore, in as much as I could sleep anywhere, and there are places I could sleep. I could go to the airport, right, and sleep in the airport overnight, which I've done, unfortunately, not by choice. My flight kept getting cancelled. But anyway, let's say I could do that, so I'm not paying anything. So therefore, there's no tangible benefit to me. Is there loss to this other guy? There's no loss to him, because since his place is not a hotel, it's not a guest house, it's not a place where normally he'd rent out, he cannot claim that I caused him loss. So according to the Ketzot HaChoshen, there's a very clear distinction. That on the one hand, right, in the case of food, where there is a tangible loss to you because that food that you gave to me no longer exists, I consumed it, I destroyed it, it no longer exists. Right? And there is clear tangible benefit to me, because even if I claim I would have fasted, but now that I've eaten, I clearly have benefited from the food. Therefore, I must pay. In the case of sleeping over at someone's house, since there is A, no tangible benefit to me, because I could theoretically sleep anywhere without paying, so therefore there's no tangible benefit to me, and B, and importantly, there's no loss to him, because he cannot claim it's a place I normally rent out, because it's not, it's just a private house. And therefore, he wouldn't have necessarily rented it out, so I'm not causing him a loss by having slept there. And so, therefore, that's the conclusion of the Ketzot to the two cases in the Code of Jewish Law. Let me point out that to act in such a way is certainly inappropriate. If I invite someone to eat at my house, it is clearly, I should specify. I mean, I don't have to actually specify it, but for me to go and charge them afterwards is unpleasant. I have a friend who had a situation that prompted me to give this class, because a friend of mine, total stranger, offered him a ride, and he accepted the ride, which I told him was not a good thing to do. You don't accept rides from strangers. I don't know who they are. I've seen too many horror movies. Aside from which, I don't know if this guy's a trained driver like these skilled New York taxi drivers who are professionals and can get me there safely, etc. So I don't know. So I wouldn't accept. But he accepted the ride. And at the end of the ride, it wasn't a taxi, it was just a guy in a car. And he says, yeah, I'm going that way anyway, I'll give you a ride. At the end of the ride, the guy turned to him and he said, that'll be $10. Now, the truth is, my friend didn't bother him the $10. He has $10. He would have taken a taxi, it would have cost more. It bothered him. This guy, apparently doing him a favor, turns around and acts in this, So the fact is, he asked me, what should he do? So the truth of the matter is this a case, what would you compare this to? Would you compare this to the case of the food, or would you compare this to the case of the sleeping? That's something you can think about. Something you could think about. You may get back to me if you see me somewhere. But in other words, riding in a car to a destination, is that like food? In the case of food, I definitely benefited. I cannot claim. Even if I claim I would have fasted, but the fact is there's pleasure in my eating the food, and so there's tangible benefit. Secondly, that food, I caused you tangible loss. Or, in which case, maybe you'll compare it to the car, in which case I definitely benefited, because to get from A to B, there's no way to do it. I mean, it's too far to walk. I would have had to get a taxi, so you can say tangible benefit. And B, was there loss? I guess, if you have a passenger in the car, there's a slightly greater consumption of gas. Maybe there's some wear and tear on the car. I don't know, but you could always claim there's some tangible loss. Or do you compare it to the case of sleeping, where I could say, no, what do you mean? If I wouldn't have got a ride with you, I could have got a ride with someone else. I could have walked. Who knows, right? You can't claim that I benefited. And secondly, right, there's no tangible loss to you, because the amount is so ridiculously small. And since you are not a taxi, then you cannot claim, had I not taken you, I would have had a paying customer. You can't claim that. So you could think about that. Either way, right, it's certainly the wrong thing to do. I don't suggest that anyone does this, right? You do someone a favor, do it with a whole heart. Don't charge them for it, and be nice. But if you're dealing with someone who did do that, then this is the two cases. In the case of food, pay. In the case of sleeping, you don't have to pay. That is the conclusion of the Tzota Hoshen. Thank you very much for watching and for listening. This has been Mordechai Becher on Shalom TV. If you'd like to hear me at other locations or times, check out our website, gatewaysonline.com, or phone the office. We have all types of events at which I speak. And my book, now in its 5th printing, just coming out, it's came out 5 years ago. So you can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and artscroll.com. Thank you very much. Gateway to Judaism, Mordechai Becher. Thank you for watching, and watch us, our other stuff on Shalom TV. Thank you very much.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who can send a tax-deductible contribution of $36 or more to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media to help support our programming. Please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD, and we thank you for your kind support.